Hey, Peoples of Friction Log. This is Kincy Clark. I'm guest hosting today with one of Friction Log's co-founders, the unstoppable Rick Blaylock. Rick, how you doing today?
Doing great, man. Beautiful day in Florida.
Isn't it always?
Most of
Yeah.
the time, yeah.
Well, exactly. That's why you live there. Hey, before
Yeah,
we get
yeah.
started, a word from our sponsor, G2I.
I'd like to talk to you about our sponsor on Friction Log, G2I. I really, really like these folks. G2I is a hiring community that connects freelance developers with remote engineering teams. And the approach, I think, is really unique. They mix solid technical assessments. They really vet their folks a lot. They do meetings with them all the time. And they mix that solid technical assessment with a real commitment to their developer health. So that means that companies get the best without a lot of the guesswork if this person is okay or not. Skilled developers who are supported, valued, not burnt out, and ready to execute from day one. So check them out, G2I. There'll be a link in the show notes.
All right. Back to Friction Log. Today's episode is going to be about some product and business cliches that often masquerade as conventional wisdom or best practices. There are a lot of them out there. I asked ChatGPT and I got a lot, but we handpicked 6 today to riff on. Before we get started, we want to make it clear that these aren't necessarily terrible ideas. Like many ideas, they all started out good, but when good ideas that involve human behavior turn into best practices, just got to be a little skeptical. And before we get started, if any of you out there in podcast land, want to have any best practices you'd like to share with us, send them to our way. We're not best practices haters. One of my favorite things to tell people is there isn't necessarily the right way to solve a problem, but there are a lot of wrong ways. So,
Oh, man.
exactly. But best practices do help people from getting off the rails and into bad practice land. So, hey, Rick, any thoughts before we get started?
Yeah, I mean, I got to admit, like, I just from multiple years of experience of best practices, me, myself being also the one who's like, that's not a good practice or best practice. I'm a little triggered, like sometimes when I hear certain people say, well, that's not a good practice or best practice, because I'm like, oh, here we go. You mean it wasn't a good practice in the 90s when you read some book? And, so I got to say, I get triggered with it. To your point, though, you're right. There are practices that are established that, it's good to reference, but sometimes they really narrow our way of thinking. And sometimes it's not good. Sometimes you approach a problem, and if you approach with best practices, you might not actually get the best solution.
No, 100%. I mean, context is king. And if you're just like, hey, I've seen this problem before, let's just lay a best practice on there. I think we both have experienced that, where that can be particularly painful as, the victim of those best practices sometimes. I will say, though, I think there are cases to be made for technical best practices, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about today. I think the best practices we're focused on today really involve humans. For example, accounting, there's best practices, and you really don't want to go off the rails on those at all. You don't want to explore the space.
Ron, well, we were trying to be like innovative.
Yeah, exactly. And Ron, yeah. What's his name? The crypto king. Oh, I can't. He goes by the initials. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, him. Yeah. Currently in jail or headed that way, about to be sentenced. Anyway, he had some really creative approaches to accounting that were not necessarily best practices. Hey, but let's get started. So the first one is cross-functional teams versus a product owner org with, I'm going to scare quote, resources versus ... whatever. So Rick, I'm going to ask you to briefly explain what the differences are and, what's going on here.
So like in the product world, there's a lot of different ways to look at how you build product and how you structure your teams. And it depends on what background you come from, what organizational, like big enterprise or services company or management consulting or whatever. You all have everybody has different viewpoints of it. But like on the cross-functional team, and this is definitely something you'll hear from like Silicon Valley Product Group, SVG. You'll hear it from like the Spotify folks to some degree, and you'll hear it from different, and this is my favorite way of doing things right now. And so when you hear them talk about it, especially Marty Kagan from SVPG, which I really like him, that's the best way to do things. And I tend to agree. And that if you don't know what a cross-functional product team is, And so you usually have a product trio. There's 3 leaders. There's the product leader, the design leader, and the engineering lead. And then they represent like the trinity of like where the product goes and drive the success. There's a lot of benefits to it. If it's a team that has earned autonomy and has earned trust, they could really do a lot. It's kind of like, early days in a startup where you know how it is, Kincy, like you have full reign to make the decision. That's why they say,
absolutely.
That's why they say the founder should be the salesman, the founder should be because they can make the decisions. And so a cross-functional product team kind of fosters that, which is great. They'll say that's best practice. Then you go to the PO side of things, a product owner type of thing. They're more Scrum project manager based things. And you have like business folks that are above it, very, very popular in enterprise or consulting services groups. And they'll say, this is the best practice. So when they roll into a company that's not doing that, they're kind of biased. They bring with them and go, well, that's not best practice what you're doing. Like, where's the hierarchy here? And these are people that are just resources. And the cross-functional product team people be like, wait, you don't think engineers can creatively think through a problem? Like you just look at them as like coding monkeys? I don't understand. So there's this like contention between them. And they both will say, well, that's not best practice. So I think those are the two competing things where like we hear best practice. Well, which one is it? Right? You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think the product owner, something interesting to explore on product owner. I'd love to get your thoughts on this as someone who's been victimized and experienced this. I think the product owner argument comes from the business has to drive. And I think we'd all agree like business should be driving. But I think one of the other disconnects in the product owner kind of framework is that you need a business person to sit on top and tell these technical resources what to do. And there's no possible way they could survive in the wild without this business person who often doesn't have a ton of experience with product, but he knows the business.
Right.
Love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100% right. It's like they'll look at it that way, but then also the cross-functional folks will say, well, no. The product manager is the business person. Like they're the ones doing the business type of things. And so they would argue that now there's like little tiny business people running around, but they're also talking to customers. They're also balancing product outcome and business outcome versus like PO orgs is top down.
Yeah.
And you're right. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, probably none, I've heard of in a PO org, someone going, well, let's talk about what's best for the customer, or let's talk about it's all, well, my Tableau dashboard says this and da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, but do you understand what's going on? No.
Yeah.
But you'll be told by them, that's not best practice doing it that way. And it's, like maybe 30 years ago when this kind of like way of organizing software in the 90s was done, that was best practice. But how many other things is software? We say 90s is best practice. Yeah.
Agile really came out. I remember when Agile came out, it just started to come out when we were, a couple years before, we were at Accelerator. And I think, again, like so many things that start out as best practices, it kind of got twisted because the original idea of an Agile person was someone who was connected technically to what was happening with the product and was using these new techniques to drive it. But it totally got hijacked by this idea of this product owner, which really were project managers in disguise.
Exactly. Yep. Which I like what Marty Kagan says about that. He says, those are just roles in a team. Anybody can be a project manager. It doesn't have to be this one specific person. It could be the designer who maybe is really good at project management or whatever. That's just a role. It doesn't have to be like your job, your employment title or whatever. And I my kind of bias towards that is I tend to think back to your point when you said people get involved, humans get involved in these things, these best practices, and they start muddying it around. And so I tend to think that as Agile got adopted into the enterprise and everybody had these certifications and all these like hierarchies and trying to fit where people were, because honestly, let's just be honest, there's some people that they're not good at what they do. And so
Exactly.
let's just find this role where we can keep giving them a job and like PO or this or that or the other. And it kind of messed up the whole idea.
No, for sure. I mean, I think the inflexibility, right? That single role. So you have to find the perfect person in your organization to fit in that. Whereas with 3 people, there's a high likelihood that at least one of those people, assuming you're hiring competent people, could do
Mhm.
this role. But if you really put it all on one person's shoulders, you're taking some organizational risk, and it's clean. And a lot of people really love it because it's like, I'm giving this guy the responsibility and then one throat to choke, like yet another cliche that is out there. I have this product owner guy and I can hold him accountable. But does that really give you a good outcome? I don't know. I don't think so.
The other thing too, I think, yeah, it's good to question that. Does it get you the outcome?
Absolutely.
The other thing, the context is lot of the folks that drive this are consulting services, management consulting firms. They drive this because it's a billable resource. It's a
Yes.
lot harder to have a billable resource that understands everything about your customer. That it's like if you need that person inside your company, and a lot of times you just outsource. Oh, we'll just build this thing, and magically people will understand,
Yeah.
and we'll just build a great product that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just comes, I mean, I do think another part of this, I mean, I've seen where just people are uncomfortable with this idea that maybe some people aren't great for roles and it's, it's
Yeah.
unfair somehow, but it's kind of funny how it works in sports, but it doesn't work anywhere else. No one would suggest that, you put like a 180-pound person on the line to defend a quarterback against like man-eating defensive ends, but it's perfectly okay to put someone who really, can hold a clipboard in charge of a product. That's perfectly fine.
It's a great point. Great analogy.
I'm the king of mixed metaphors. That's all we get today.
I like it. But I think this leads to the next one we want to talk about, because on the cross-functional product teams, there's actually some cons to that too. And so like when people say, best practices, well, it's a best practice if you have the right kind of team that's empowered, that has earned trust, that kind of thing, and they can get autonomy. And I think that's the next topic we want to talk about, which is best practices. You should just give everybody autonomy and empower everybody and trust everybody, right? That's another big best practice. What do you think?
Yeah.
I've got all sorts of thoughts, but
Yeah.
what do you think on that one?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, your cross-functional teams versus product owner triggers you. This triggers me to no end because it's just such it's just such a terrible thing to us. Cause I think it promotes this idea that like the whole purpose of the organization is to empower people and to make them autonomous. And that's just a technique. That's a way of doing business. It can work. It may not work. Again, I wouldn't want to empower a junior person who maybe came from a large corporate environment and is successfully filling a product owner role or a product leader role. I wouldn't want to empower that person and say, hey, you're responsible for this huge product without any guardrails or ways to make sure that they don't do something wrong that's really outside of their remit. I think it's just really important to really think about what is the purpose of autonomy. That's not the end state. But I think a lot of people confuse, I need to empower my team. That's what I've been told. They need to be autonomous. That can lead to some really bad outcomes at times. And again, it's a good technique to empower people, but it's not always the right technique.
I like how you put it there. It's a technique, it's an approach, it's a tool. Because
Yes.
at the end of the day, the goal of business is to make money, right? Is to succeed, is to make money, is to, to grow. And so there's tools to do that. And one of those could be autonomy and empowerment to
Yes.
achieve that. But that's at probably different times. Also, I kind of tend to think that those two words engender trust, like that like, you don't get
Yes.
autonomy just like automatically. That's stupid. That's like, you just like trust. You don't just automatically get all of my trust. You can watch my kids. You can come into my house. You can drive my car. It's just like, well, I was told I was supposed to trust people. So, hey, here's my car.
Yeah,
Drive my
exactly.
car. No, that's not how this works. You earn that. You earn trust. And that's autonomy is the same way. Autonomy is a form of trust. It's, wow, you can do this. I want you to make these decisions. I want you to own this. That's a trust thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably a podcast in this, but we've talked about this idea of trust being multi-channel versus single channel. And I think a big mistake here is thinking that trust is it's a binary. It's a 0 or 1, either like I trust you or I don't. I mean, there's people that are very close to me that I don't trust them to do certain things, but I trust them to do a lot of other things. And it's like that in business, whereas I might trust a frontline support agent to handle a certain breadth of problems, but I don't necessarily trust them to handle an escalation that's hugely technical, that has maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line. Because even if they could navigate that successfully, I don't want the risk of failure on their shoulders, and I don't want them to feel
That's a good point.
like they're the only one, because autonomy goes both ways. Again, we think of autonomy as like a teenager. I get to do what I want. I get to crash my parents' car. Well, if you crash your parents' car, you got to buy a new one. Whoa, wait, hold on. I just wanted the good part of autonomy. I don't want that whole responsibility thing. So again, like trust is absolutely like the foundation that we're talking about here. And I think, again, if you can break out of a mindset of this person trusts me or not, that's not the question. It's what do they trust me to do, and how can I expand that trust circle to include more and more things? And again, we test this, we put people into situations where they have to earn the trust.
Yeah. Right. Yep. Such a good point. And again, back to the best practice. I'm just supposed to like empower people. That's what I was told to do, and trust them. Okay, like brand new manager on the job. All right, you all get autonomy. Everybody gets autonomy because I was told to do that. Best practices.
I know I see this. I'm in a support kind of organization, and we have a Slack where we talk about stuff, and I see that. Oh, well, you should just empower your team and then everything will be great. Maybe we should ask a few more questions before we make that recommendation, because maybe they're dealing with very sensitive topics that we need kind of guardrails around, or maybe this is an inexperienced team and we don't want to, again, put the responsibility on their shoulders. Because a lot of times I don't want to make someone who isn't really capable of cashing that check, responsible for writing it, right? So it's about, where does that accountability lie? And typically as a senior leader, as a director, as a VP, the accountability sits with me, and I'm not necessarily willing to have my career go sideways because someone else made a suboptimal decision because they just didn't have the experience. So right.
So I totally get it. Again, go back to your point about it's a tool. Like autonomy is not a destination, because if you get to your destination of autonomy, okay, now what do we do? Well, all of a sudden, guess what? Someone's going to sweep in and go, oh, let me tell you what to do. Oh, we're autonomous. Wait, no, we get to decide what we do. Hold on a second. Yeah. Not a destination.
Because the environmental change, change, and we need to recalibrate. Absolutely. It's not a destination. It's a process, and it's part of the journey. So, well, that's a good one. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a gear change here for you, Rick. Engineering. Here's an engineering one. Don't repeat yourself, which dry, separation to concerns, some of those concepts. Love to kind of explain what those are for people in the audience who don't know what they are. And then we can kind of talk about what those mean.
Yeah. So there's a thing in engineering philosophy and software engineering. It's called dry. Don't repeat yourself. And the point of it is, if you have to write the same code over and over and over again, then you're doing something wrong. You should just write it once, put it in a function or wherever, and then you can just reuse it over and over again. So that's the principle. And that's generally considered a best practice. I mean, I still consider it best practice, but you can overthink it. You can use it too much to to the point where you end up taking longer to code things and deliver things because you're like, oh, dry. This is my religion, dry. I hate it when things are repeated in code. So I'm never going to let that happen. And 10 weeks later, you deliver, on one Jira ticket or something or whatever. It's like you end up over architecting. And so this is especially dangerous for software engineers who are very picky about things, right? They're detail oriented. They like things to be neat and orderly and things like that. So dry really speaks to us as software engineers because it's it's very particular. So it has the allure of being a best practice. It generally is.
Yeah.
I'm not bashing on it,
I would agree.
but it can be so
Yes.
distracting. And so sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, what's the acronym? It's not dry. There's another
DAMP?
acronym that people
saw it.
say.
Look this up because full disclosure, I was a little surprised. I was like, wow, I hadn't heard of this.
Yeah, it's the opposite of this, where it's if you find yourself doing it multiple times and you do need the exact thing. But
Wet, where it's write everything twice.
Write everything twice. Yes, that's it. And the point of that is it keeps you from overthinking it. Oh, I'm going to have to reuse this again. I better put this over here. It's actually faster. If you're in a delivery thing, it's actually faster to repeat yourself, believe it or not. It's actually faster to copy,
yes,
paste,
100%.
change a couple things, and it's a bespoke function. It's actually faster to do that.
Yes.
And sometimes it's actually better. Yeah. Sometimes it's actually better too. So it's just one of those things where best practice can actually interfere with your ability to make progress. Another one is like the separation of concerns. So a great example of this is in the Web 1.0.
Let me hold that thought though, because I want to come back to this drive, because what it's reminding me of is data normalization. When you normalize data tables, and you can totally go, it's the same concept where you're only supposed to have one type of data, and you can have many to many relationships, and you end up creating like these crazy obtuse data structures because you've kind of adhered to this religion of data normalization. It's very similar. We're only supposed to have one instance of this in your database. And if it's replicated twice and you need to create a new table and create a relationship with it, if you just wanted to like have a data model, hey, we're selling cars to humans, you could end up with 50 tables if you go down like this data normalization, and you spend so much time. I mean, I think that's really the thing that you're getting at, if I'm not mistaken, is really how much time do you expend trying to achieve this kind of goal of, not repeating yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You end up creating a lot of complexity too, accidentally. That's funny. That's a best practice, but the other competing best practice is on that complexity part, where like the other part of our engineering brain is don't make it too complex. And it's just constant battle. It's kind of funny. But the other part of dry that I was going to say was like on the best practices with Web 1.0, like the separation of concerns and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Man, back in the day, like you had your CSS, you had your HTML and your JavaScript, and them three should never meet. Like that was the religion. Like your CSS is over here.
Yes.
HTML is over here, JavaScript's here. Separate them out. You should never have inline styles. You should never have inline JavaScript. That was the religion. And I fully subscribed to it for the longest time. And then React came on the scene and just blew everybody's mind. Like, no. We're going to put it all in together and it's going to be amazing.
I know.
Yeah. And so I got to say, I was one of the ones at the very beginning. I was like, no, that's not best practice. That's not what we do. We do it this way. And I got to say that limited me from understanding the power of React. And now no one really questions it. I mean, every once in a while you'll see on Twitter, I remember in 1999 when the best practices of WC3 was established, and everybody goes, yeah, nobody cares. And everybody coding React wasn't alive then. So what's your point?
Exactly. No. It's funny looking at the code. I mean, I hadn't really thought about it this way, but now that I'm looking at some of the things you've written in React, like that absolutely makes sense. I mean, it gets a little bonkers, man. These class statements have 10,000 different classes in there, whereas like previously you would spend so much time in your CSS to like craft it perfectly. So there was like an individual class and all those things. And now you're just like slamming stuff together. I certainly don't know enough about it to comment definitively. But again, it's that balance of complexity versus kind of simplicity, and it's kind of a loop almost, right? Like you make things so simple, it becomes complex, which is, kind of interesting to think about. I really think it's very similar to data normalization though, because I've gone through that exercise too, where I'm like, okay, I need to create more tables, but then you just end up creating lots and lots of tables. And then the code to support all that gets bonkers, where it's just maybe we just have drop downs that don't have tables associated with them. And we just enumerate the variables.
Exactly. Or just stuff like on the data side of things. It's sometimes, oh, well, we can't repeat this data. It's got to be over. It's okay, but you're going to create 2 pivot tables and then your query is going to be expensive and then
exactly.
yada, yada, yada. Or you could just stuff it in a JSON field and it's exactly what you need. And yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. Well, we have another one. I'll let you introduce that one, Rick.
Yeah. So this one is, I know this is a trigger word for you. I always laugh because I'm very much a customer focused person, but the customer is always right. That one does.
Yes.
It always piques my antennas, and I'm sure it does to you even more.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we've seen this everywhere, right? Like retail stores, you see this in value statements, investor pitches. I mean, you name it, customers right. It's everywhere. Sometimes it's a mantra. I will say in, I don't know, this Twitter sphere, whatever the tech world we operate in, whatever we want to call this crazy bananas path we're on. I do think a lot of people recognize that it's not necessarily a best practice, but there's still enough where it doesn't come out so much when people say, Kincy, the customer's always right. You got to organize your team around that. I don't hear that very often, but I'll hear it in conversations and it gets weaponized. And that's when I don't like it. It's when you're having a conversation with someone and someone like, well, the customer's always right. So we better do it this way. And it's, well, hold on, because that's just code for like non-critical thinking. And generally it's also a way for that person to kind of get their way without really having defended intellectually. It's, well, the customer's always right. Like, ergo, we need to do it that way without any sort of thought. Well, is this the right customer we're doing it for? Because again, customers can be right, and they often are. And if they're giving you money, you definitely want to take their opinion seriously. But I had a saying several years ago, which is the customers are often wrong, and we need to tell them that. Because again, they don't use products correctly. They need to be educated. And again, is that a design problem? Very well could be, but we have to invest in. And that's again what your customer facing organizations can help you with, is getting them aligned with kind of the product vision and making sure that they're using it right. And again, if you're really starting to encounter friction at that point, then we can rethink, maybe they are right. Maybe we need to do this differently. But again, just applying some thought. Curious to hear how you think about that as a product guy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where definitely as a product guy, like, and from a qualitative research perspective too, you don't just take a customer, what they say at their face value, you try to get to the root problem, cause. And that's when you're talking to a customer, it's, well, this is what I do and this is what I want. And you like instantly I'm like, is that really what you do? Let me ask you some questions. Tell me a story about how you bought this. Just tell, like, when you walked into the store, did you really have this complex matrix of, oh, this and this, and this is my philosophy, so that's why I went to this? No. Tell me how you actually bought that.
Yeah, exactly.
So the customer's right, but it doesn't mean what they're saying is right. It's like whatever they were doing behind the scenes probably is right. And it's the product person's job to figure out what that is and to address the need or whatever.
Yeah. I think another place where this affects product people, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but I may have been on the wrong end of this, where I will support people are very guilty of this. Success people even more so, where we'll bring customer issues and say, hey, product engineering, you guys got to fix this ASAP because, we've got all these people screaming. And a lot of times that's more evidence of a broken cross-functional communication path than actually customer needs. And sometimes that's the only way like we can feel heard with the product and engineering organizations, is we kind of have to play this trump card of, hey, the customer wants it, you got to go do it. And the ultimate way to do that, to play that game, is go to the CEO or the COO or the CFO and complain like, product's not listening to me. Here's all this data. This is what the customers want. And invariably, heads roll, people get mad. It's not a great way to do business. I may or may not have done it in the past. But I think it's more of an evidence, though, of broken communications between teams than really someone believing the customer's right, though. Although, I don't know, success people sometimes, I think, genuinely believe that their customers are always right for obvious and non-obvious reasons.
Yeah, right. I think for job perpetuity reasons.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you're called to retain customers and Yeah, I mean, I get it. I mean, again, that's a bad systems design as opposed to like success people being evil. They're just,
Right.
doing what they're intended to do. So the
Mm.
next one, this is some great example of Silicon Valley wisdom: fail fast and fail often. I'm going to put this right up there with move fast and break things. And my all-time favorite cliche, think out of the box. No one even knows what that comes from. But let's start out positively, Rick. Let's start this out positively, and let's talk about fail fast, fail often, like why you would do that. And then maybe we can kind of back into
and how it gets interpreted later on, right? So,
yeah.
so a lot of those
Mhm.
sayings are good in certain contexts, right? So fail fast, fail often on a positive side to me is learn, focus on learning. You don't know what you don't know. And so you gotta learn quick to be successful in whatever you're going to do. So one way to do that is you just experiments. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And that's what fail means is
Yeah.
I tried this, I experimented, and then we found the answer over here. How that gets translated though, I mean, I subscribe to that to a degree for,
100%.
but what I don't subscribe to is you keep failing for like years and you're never successful. Then even if you're just
Yeah.
like you fail and you're just a little successful, like at some point you're just a failure and you might as well just call it that.
Yeah. No, for sure. I think the other place, and I know this, is it gets used to justify sloppiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because people are like, hey, we're just failing fast. We're not going to put this together well. We're not going to build this well because we're failing fast, and we just got to get some stuff out there and see what the market says, and then we'll go back and fix it. But the problem is, if you don't build it well, then you rarely go back and fix it, and then you just have this series of like quasi failures that are kind of building on themselves.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that. Like I'm very scrappy and very much, let's just try it and see what happens. Let's just try it and see what happens. And there's some positives to that for sure. Again, back to context and what you're trying to do in the outcome.
Yes.
But in the end, from a product perspective, there is a tax. There is a cost for that.
Yes. Yes, there is. But you have to balance out with speed. And I think that's something you and I have kind of learned together is like, there's a balance of moving fast and then, building well and building things to kind of sustain. To me, the cliche that I don't like in this is the fast piece. I think there's just such a, what's the word? Addiction. I don't know. That's probably the wrong word, but there's almost this like worship of speed, which is interesting because when you look at kind of like the data, like there's not a lot of first mover companies that become the big behemoths in the industry. I mean, I can't think of many. I can think of a lot of big FANG companies, but none of them started out first. And it's interesting, like this fail first, fail often. I think the emphasis to your point is learn. Like, how about learn well, learn often? That might be learn fast, learn often rather than fail. Because again, like there's a lot of ways to fail. You can just run down a road as fast as possible and you're going to trip over everything in the way. I mean, just this, I don't know, the addiction to speed, I think is problematic here. And I think this highlights it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like speed in a lot of ways, but there's again, back to context. The problem is a lot of the people, not everybody, but a lot of companies that say fast, we need to move fast or whatever. They're these companies that they're probably PO organizations that they feel the pressure of not being able to deliver because they have skill issues. They don't have people that can deliver. They've overhired. So they've got 300 people and they go, well, we should be able to move fast and blah, blah, blah. And then, well, how come this company over here where 2 or 3 people are beating us? They must move so much faster. And it's no, actually, they just work more than you do. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, they're
exactly.
probably smarter than you are. And number 3, they're empowered. Like they actually have control of stuff. So it's not just to move fast. It's other facets that help them deliver faster than your company is delivering.
Yeah. Speed of delivery, I think you always want to accelerate that, I think. But again, to artificially induce speed could create an issue. I mean, I think there's another boogeyman out there, though, that pushes hard on that. We've talked about this a lot outside of this context, which are investors, because again, they want to know what their investments are doing as quickly as possible, crash or, get over the mountain, Michael Siebel's kind of phrasing on that. Can we get over the top as quickly as possible? Can we crash as quickly as possible? And I think investors really feed the speed thing. And I think in some ways, some of these cliches are really investor driven cliches, not so much successful founders. I mean, you don't hear a lot of successful founders say, I don't know, unless they're doing their TED talk or something, they don't have any accountability. But I hear more investors in that class of people talk about failing fast. This is the spirit of the valley, blah, blah, blah. I think those cliches come from them a lot.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, it's like the best practice thing, right? It's like best practice is this. And it's, well, again, context.
Yeah. Yeah. Context is king. Yeah. And a lot of those people haven't experienced it, or they experienced it in a different era, your favorite, your favorite one to pick on, the 90s,
right.
I got my big exit in the 90s. I've been investing ever since. So you better move fast like we did. Like, okay, cool.
You know what I think is funny too about this is back to the whole, like, this company's moving faster than my company or whatever, is what gets translated as we're moving fast is interesting. Back to like investors, they definitely affect what that means. But the things it takes for a smaller company, small startup that's outpacing some giant company, they don't look at it like, oh, well, they only have 10 people. Maybe we should have 10 people. No, they go, we should hire 1,000 more people, then we could move faster. And I don't think you understand how this works. There is a way to move fast, and it's probably not what you're doing.
100%. It's probably not having meetings and, product owner led initiatives that, get everyone on retreats and all these other things that like people think they need to do to, exactly. No, kind of, I mean, I think a lot of founders talk about this, where if they could go back to their early days, they would move so much faster than they are now, because they've acquired a lot of extra people. I mean, obviously, as your code grows and your product grows, you can't quite move as fast, but a lot more of this is around people, right? Just having armies of people that have all these vested interests in what you're doing. It's just hard to move fast. But it's easy to fail. You can fail a lot in that environment. That's for sure. Fail often and a lot.
You can definitely fail a lot. Yep. Yeah. So actually, that's kind of a good segue into this next thing, because a lot of that moving slow with people is because you add all these people and now there's more communication channels and we have to make sure everybody's included and syncing and all this stuff. So that makes you slower. And that comes to like communication and then back to trust and stuff like that. And so the other best practice you hear is, well, we need transparent communication. We're going to hire 1,000 more people. We need transparent communication, which I'm a fan of. Again, best practice to a point, but I don't know. What do you think about some of that?
No, I mean, I agree 1,000% on the transparency piece of being something to aspire to, but you have to be careful about this because transparency often is in the eye of the beholder. So a lot of people think they want all this information, but they're really, what are they going to do with it? Like, I'm a big fan of the financials and all those things being available and in the company, but that can be hugely distracting. And it's as smart as a lot of engineers. I'm going to pick on engineers here because, man, they are like activist group number one when it comes to this stuff. Everywhere I've been, it's been engineers like, I demand to see these things. And they'll just make these outrageous assumptions. I don't understand why our gross margin is this. And we need to do this. And, these finance guys who, I don't know, they've been studying it their whole lives and they're really good at it. And they have to get peppered by engineers on these questions. So again, the transparency, coming back to that point, the transparency, I think, can create a lot of confusion by just providing a ton of information without context. And that is the danger of transparency, is just overloading your team with information, because you do get to a point where you can't provide everybody all the information. It's just overwhelming.
Yeah, I totally agree. It like, especially on like you said, the business metrics and stuff like that, because it's so multifaceted. You can make a statement like, well, we're going to be transparent on where we're at. And we're on the path to hitting this goal. We're doing great. And you use these words, we're doing great. We're on the path to doing this, whatever. And then the next week you do layoffs and people go, you said we were on the path. We're doing great. Well, we are. We're going to hit this goal, but we have to lay off people to do it. And they're like, well, you didn't say that. And it's, well, we didn't want to give you all of the information. And if we give you all of it, that would have been too much. And actually layoffs probably too extreme, but there's other examples of that where you focus on a metric or you 2 or 3 metrics, like here's our best business metrics. We're doing great. And they don't understand the underlying, again, like the CFO's got a giant spreadsheet with 10 other tabs that give you the other story that you're not getting.
Yeah.
And actually, if he were to tell them to you, you wouldn't understand it anyway, or you would be just like, you would only hear the one metric and the rest of it, you'd be like, well,
Yes.
And so you end up causing a lot of problems sometimes when you do that.
No, for sure. And, to your point, like maybe you're fundraising, maybe you're doing some weird things because you're fundraising and you need to show certain metrics to investors, and that doesn't necessarily make sense. And, oh, by the way, we don't want to tell everyone we're fundraising right now for whatever reason, that may be good, bad, and different. But there's I think layoffs is a great example though, actually, right? Because I think sometimes you do have to make those really tough decisions. And like, when is a good time to tell people that we're going to be laying them off? Because the moment word gets out, the entire company gets flatlined. And so I think as painful as a few of the ones I've been in have been, I think we are getting to a place of best practices around layoffs where people they're making the C-suites are making the decisions as quickly as possible. They're ripping the Band-Aid and then they're accelerating through. The challenge there is that, again, you're transparent with the information, but then you can't get it right. So you forget something or you forget little details here and there. So there's just always this balance of being transparent, versus great execution. There are really good ways to do layoffs, but they take time. I mean, there's no really a good way to do a layoff, but there's better ways to do layoffs than others. That's a classic case of the tension between transparency and execution.
Yeah.
But I think trust, one thing that we didn't call out here was trust. My feeling on this is what you need to do is build trust where teams feel that other teams are doing their job. And that's really a lot of times what this comes down to. No one really needs the transparency if you feel like that team's doing a great job. I mean, you may want it. I got it. And I'm not against it. I think if anyone's hearing like Rick and Kincy do not like transparency, that's not what we're saying at all. It's just, it can be distracting. And I think a lot of times it's a signal of distrust. I don't trust what that team's doing, so I want to know what they're doing. If you don't trust what a team that is specialized is doing, you've got some other problems. Transparency is not going to help you, probably.
Right. Yeah. What good is transparency with somebody you don't trust? That doesn't work.
Somebody just makes it worse. Again, I mean, you just got to call it out for what it is. I don't think that they're doing a great job. That's a different conversation to have. So, all right. Well, we are at time. Good conversation. We got through 6 of these things. I know there's a lot more. And again, if you're listening and you've got some that, you want us to talk about, we'd love to hear about them. So send them our way.
Awesome. All right. Thanks. See you next week.
All right.